Hi there. I call this the Critics of Antinatalism Part 2 because I couldn't really think of anything else to call it, actually. It's a bit wide ranging. But let me first say that the latest social experimentalist Danny Shine video is extraordinary, actually. Like a lot of his videos, uh, presents in microcosm a lot of the problems of the human condition just by going out into the streets of London. And I know you're going to say that's not empirical, but it's an anecdotal evidence. But surely you can extrapolate to a certain degree from the evidence that Danny Shine presents. Anyway, the point about it is that you know the thing is that you must know about the state. The state has a special organisation connected to MI5 that go around the mental hospitals and even the streets of London, picking up particularly mentally ill people and feeding them with certain stimuli, let us say, that either make the person go and kill enemies of the state or to discredit them in some way. And so you can imagine that MI5 would take some mentally ill person and feed them a whole lot of Danny Shine's videos, for example, and for that person to either go and kill somebody's children or go to some hospital and kill an antinatalist or blow up an antinatalist clinic. And that would be the end of Danny Shine and antinatalism as a movement. If you were anyway associated with the antinatalist movement, and of course the whole gory, grisly details would be splashed over all the newspapers, then you couldn't even show your face around London with or without a megaphone. You know, it would be like dead for you. And someone might even come up and kill you, which is what the state actually wants. Fortunately, Danny Shine is perfectly aware of this, and he always stays within the bounds of absurdity, humour, comedy, satire, parody, whatever. So that basically, people don't take him seriously on one level, and yet on another level, perhaps they do take him seriously, or perhaps the people that he uh, needs to take him seriously are respond, in fact, to his subliminal message, if you like. But you don't shoot the messenger. Do you know what I mean? So he's very careful to avoid anybody trying to shoot the messenger, because look what happened to John Lennon. I mean, John Lennon was naive, and he was literally executed by the state in order to silence him. Because he was a celebrity, and because he was saying stuff which the state didn't like. So basically, what is it about antinatalism, which society hates? Well, some people in society hate it. If you get the philosophical argument, of course, then you don't hate it. You completely accept it. But I honestly think that a lot of people are very, very disturbed by antinatalism. Um, and we've seen, in fact, that a whole religion called the Cathars, Albigensians, were wiped out by the Roman Catholic Church because, in part, they preached antinatalism. As simple as that. And they were a very powerful church in the south of France, or mid France, and they were wiped out by the Inquisition, in part because they said reproduction is evil, literally evil, because they justified it by having a very rigorous metaphysics to back up their claim that people shouldn't be reproducing. So you can tell to what lengths a threatened fertility-based religion can go in order to shut up somebody who's talking about antinatalism in a religious context, which the Cathars were. And the Cathars also have been dissed ever since by the Truther movement and some sort of satanic conspiracy to depopulate the world, starting with the Cathars who worship the devil and not God. Ridiculous, of course, but there you go. The opposition to antinatalism is definitely there. It echoes down through the centuries. I mean, we're talking about the 12th century here, and we're still kind of feeling the repercussions of the suppression of Cathar religion. So why is it that antinatalism is so fundamentally evil, in quotation marks? Well, basically, it's because existence equals euros or profit. Okay, obviously, if human beings are non-existent, you can't make a profit out of them, and indeed, you wouldn't exist to be able to make a profit out of the non-existent people. So basically, non-existence is a threat to the capitalist system, and any suggestion of complete depopulation, of complete getting rid of all reproductive, the ability to reproduce, if you got rid of it, nobody would be able to make a profit out of your existence, because that is why you exist. You exist for other people to make money out of you, or you exist to make money out of other people, you see. And this is why it's a fundamental sort of, absurdity in a way that people regard antinatalism with, because, they just can't imagine. And why do you make profit out of people? And why do people allow themselves to be profited from? It's because pleasure, definitely pleasure. And people want pleasure, even though it's temporary, and always made at someone else's expense, or very often, and also doesn't, you can't take it with you, kind of thing. But people live for the here and now of hedonistic pleasure, and the more money you have, the more pleasure you have, and indeed the more sexual pleasure you could have as well. I say could have, but a lot of rich people don't have any sexual pleasure at all, because they're impotent, because they're too stressed about making money. But that's another story. So that's one reason, is that obviously Danny Shine is a threat, because he's threatening people's ability to make money out of the existence of the human race, taken at its ridiculous ad absurdum argument. But there is another thing about it, and I think people, this thing about children are a blessing. I think this, and it is often backed up, or pretty much always backed up, by a religious institution or a religious movement, or a church, a mainstream church, is because the church, the religion, actually reflects a very fundamental biological urge, which obviously stems from the sexual urge, which is to reproduce. Despite what people say about sex sells, and sex is a is an existential pleasure which doesn't need to end in reproduction. Despite all that, the biological urge is to reproduce. And anybody who thinks that sexuality has got anything else to do except with reproduction is deluding themselves, because sexual pleasure has nothing to do with it. We are just sexual objects that carry on the haploid DNA in order to create the zygotic diploid DNA, which is the new baby. So the end is reproduction. The end of sexuality is reproduction. And you can talk about gayness, and you can talk about, a lot of gay people want children, don't they? That says it all, really. You can talk about gayness, you can talk about transsexuality, you can talk about androgyny, you can reproduce, you can do all that kind of fancy stuff, all that sophism, really, and that's all it is, because you have sex to reproduce, all right. It's everywhere. It's obviously everywhere, because sex is used to sell products and services, and sex is a fundamental biological urge. So, of course, coupled with aspirational advertising, and you have it. So obviously, if people weren't reproducing, then pretty much sexuality would die out. The importance, the value of sexuality would die out, pretty much, because ultimately your biology would say, well, there's no point in this sexual pleasure. It's not pleasurable unless I have the blessing of children afterwards. So basically, it's no point. There's no point in having sex at all. And basically, without generalizing too much, the culture would start to go against sexuality altogether, and be a sort of quasi-Puritanism would arise, whereby people would think that sexuality literally has no value, and therefore it would not become normative anymore, and would actually, the belief would then be that sexuality is pointless and meaningless, and people would find other ways of intense pleasure, of seeking and finding intense pleasure, possibly through some kind of recreational drug, which would give them dreams and and those drugs wouldn't necessarily have to be illicit. They could be prescription drugs, that mean like was it Tegretol. Tegretol, for example, is a drug which gives you beautiful dreams. I mean, why bother to wake up at all when you're on that drug? It's fantastic. It's a happy drug, and so people would be, they put it in the water if they could. All other legal considerations aside, they would literally put that drug in the water because it's so brilliant. Sodium amytal would be another one they put in the water if they could as well. So, and that's in Brave New World by Huxley as well, if you don't believe me. Other people have foreseen this, it's not just me. Anyway, so that's one thing. And the other thing, I think people like to reproduce because they really, really do believe that you achieve immortality through reproduction. And I think, often people say, he's got his father's eyes. Um, and they sort of mean that literally, really. I mean, you literally have got your father's eyes, that your child has got your eyes, so that when you die, there is something physical left of you to continue. And that's notwithstanding all the mental characteristics of the child that can be so much a reflection of your own. And if it's true that a lot of pairs of chromosomes and clusters of chromosomes account for intelligence and character and even dreams and existential feelings, then in fact, in a way, it is true that you achieve immortality through reproduction. And of course, people on a subconscious level feel that and recognize that, which is why people, generally speaking, don't like to be told they can't reproduce. I mean, they don't even like to be told they can't even have just one child. They want more than one child because they recognize, that the more children you have, the more, in a sense, you are reproduced. You attain immortality through the more children that you actually have, which is something people don't consciously or believe in, or it's not actually expressed. It's one of these things that no one talks about, but I think it's there, and you could probably find it in popular culture and literature if you tried as well. I'm not an expert in popular culture or literature, so I wouldn't know. But so you see, again, the feeling against Danny Shine is quite intense, really. It's a subconscious, intense hatred for somebody that says, you shouldn't have been born. And then, of course, I suppose ultimately it is insulting, and he means, it is an insult to say that people shouldn't have been born. If you say to someone you should never have been born, like people say to Danny Shine, it is meant as an insult. It is meant, like, go kill yourself. It's like you often have this comment on social media. People say, go kill yourself. It's just a sort of expression of anger, against somebody. And it could be bullying as well, or part of the bullying strategy of somebody online, as we all know, as we've all experienced. But I mean, he means it in a nice way. He doesn't actually mean to people you should go and kill your children, or you should hate your children, or you should regret having a child. And he's usually nice to people, nice to pregnant people that come up to him and saying I should kill my baby now, or he doesn't say that. He doesn't say that because this is really about future persons. I mean, it isn't about your children now. It isn't about the children that you've created now. It's about your intention to create more children. That's the thing that you've got to question. I mean, if you're already pregnant, well, that's great. That's a blessing, indeed. What you've got to do is look at the reasons why you want to reproduce more children, or not even more children, but any children at all. Is it because you think that you'll become immortalized through having children? And you've got to think about the implications of that statement. Is it because you think that having children is a blessing and is a fundamental biological urge? But if it is an urge, then, as a rational, conscious human being, can't you go against that urge? Or can't you sublimate that urge into something else? Put your libido into something else rather than simply reproducing DNA. And finally, of course, about existence equals dollars equals profit. Again, that's really the fundamental brass tacks of it all. That's why the MI5 would move against Danny Shine if they really thought he was being taken seriously, or they would move against a cult like the Church of Nowhere that really propagated this idea of not having children, and antinatalism as a philosophy, and indeed this video itself. And of course, all they really have to do, though, they don't have to kill you. They just have to deplatform you. So they just tell YouTube or Facebook or whatever, just to simply deplatform the person, and that will be an end to it. So they don't even need to kill you now. If John Lennon had a Facebook page, they would just simply deplatformed him rather than had him assassinated, you see. But assassination is still an option, I think. It's just that in this day and age, if once you're deplatformed from everywhere, well, that's basically your tongue cut out of your mouth, isn't it? Really. Nevertheless, I think from time to time, antinatalism will spring up as a philosophical discussion, a conversation, if you like. And as I said, all governments need to do is to increase taxation on people intending to have children. All future people having children would be taxed more. They would increase VAT on baby clothes and things like that. So there's plenty of taxation ways of limiting population, and in fact reducing population to zero, because you appeal to people's greed, people's preservation of their money, and you just say to them, it's just not worth you having babies. We'll just tax you out of existence. Like they tax cigarette smoking out of existence, and like they're going to tax petrol cars out of existence, off the road, literally off the road. It just become completely absurd to have a petrol car because you'd be paying so much in road tax. So, from time to time, as I say, you will find this conversation of antinatalism cropping up, and not just as sort of as spiritual entertainment or absurdity or mischief making or just an expression of misanthropy, but in actual fact a proper serious conversation. And people will look at the economic impact of not having any more children and things like that. It'll be taken quite seriously eventually. And if there's any profit to be made from not having children, then you can bet your bottom dollar that the corporations would back it. So that's all I really want to say on this subject. Keep your eyes and ears open for this conversation about antinatalism, because you might be seeing more of it in the future.